What happened with the medium named Wellesley Powell shook him so deeply that even he, who was familiar with many terrifying paranormal phenomena, felt true terror. Never before had he experienced such dreadful fear. The medium could not understand whether he was losing his mind or if an existential dimension was opening up to him, one that he had never even suspected. But most importantly, Wellesley Powell, after what had happened to him, viewed the concept of death in an entirely different way and realized that life after death not only exists but is fundamentally different from what most people believe. Everything there is completely different. It seemed to begin with a simple, harmless incident. On Monday, the 12th of March, 1917, Wellesley Powell was walking along the shore. Suddenly, he had the feeling that someone was watching him. This feeling of being intensely stared at was so real that he turned around to look. But there was no one nearby. Nevertheless, the disturbing and unsettling feeling did not fade. On the contrary, from that moment on, it relentlessly pursued him. When he returned home, Wellesley Powell sat down at the table to write an official letter. And right at that moment, a kind of mysticism began that froze the blood in his veins. As soon as he had prepared to write the first line, his hand suddenly jerked uncontrollably and began to move across the paper without his knowledge. Wellesley Powell tried to stop it with his willpower, but he could not. It seemed as though someone else was guiding his hand. And when he read what had finally been written, he began to tremble even more with panic. The words on the paper were, "On one of the August evenings I died." Thus began the incredible correspondence between the medium Wellesley Powell and the soul of a deceased soldier, the authenticity of which was later confirmed by many serious personalities. Even in his youth, he had decided to dedicate his life to the study of such phenomena. Over time, he became a leading specialist in this field and wrote several books on the subject. But the greatest interest was sparked by the book based on exactly this correspondence with the soul of the deceased soldier, who dictated his messages from the afterlife to him. Before the war, he was a simple teacher named Thomas Downing. He lived in a small town in eastern England. However, in the year 1915, he was drafted for military service, and after 9 months, he fell at the front in France. What prompted the former soldier to reach out to the medium? What important information did he want to convey to the living from that world? His first message was, people should know that physical death is nothing. In his messages, he explained that despite the sorrow of the living over the death of loved ones, they must understand that they are not forever separated from them. As an example of what happens in the first moments after death, the former soldier told his own story. He described it as follows. On that unfortunate August evening, I was about to begin my service when I suddenly heard a whistle behind me. Then I felt something strike me violently on the neck. At that moment, I was outside my own physical body. My soul left it, but remained nearby, as if it were connected by an invisible thread. Therefore, I could see my comrades lifting my body and carrying it to the trenches to administer first aid. They thought I was just unconscious, but alive. The soldier continued and said that what he experienced seemed so real that for a moment, he thought it was just a nightmare. A terrible and uncomfortable nightmare, but still a dream. Soon, he would wake up, but unfortunately, the awakening did not come. When he was eventually taken to the field hospital and the doctors began their examination, he realized that he felt no pain. And the further it went, the clearer it became to him that he was dead. Once he accepted this fact, it seemed as if a force stopped all his thoughts and feelings. Darkness and forgetfulness set in. It was like a dream without dreams. But he knew he was not sleeping. He was in a state that was like nowhere and never. When he finally awoke from the state, he realized that his body was no longer there. At that very moment, he fully understood that he was dead. But this no longer frightened him. On the contrary, he became curious about what would come next. In one of his messages, which was transmitted through the medium Wellesley Powell, he wrote, "I felt free and light. I was in a body, but this body was ethereal, not physical, although it was almost indistinguishable from the previous one on the outside. But in this body, there was no pain, and it required neither food nor water." Then he experienced how his consciousness expanded, and eventually, Amazing secrets of life after death were revealed to him. He wanted to share these revelations with the living, to warn them against mistakes that could make their lives in the afterlife difficult and painful, and to give them hope that with the end of earthly life, not everything ends, and that they will be rewarded for their good deeds. But not everything was so simple with these messages. Eventually, they stopped. Later, it turned out that the inhabitants of the afterlife did not approve of him sharing the secrets of the other world with the living. The people were content with what they already knew. The souls of the deceased warned him about being too open with the medium, but despite this advice, he continued his attempts at communication. He had no choice but to publish the messages that had already been transmitted through the medium. However, several years later, the soldier contacted Wellesley Powell again. The reason for this was that in the afterlife, he had met a man who had once killed him on the battlefield. And what was astonishing was that this man, before leaving this world himself, had read the book in which the story of the deceased soldier was told, along with all the messages he had transmitted from the afterlife. As he read the book, he was in the hospital where he was dying from an incurable disease. This book helped him accept the inevitable end of his life. And he made a promise to himself that if everything written in the book was true, he would try to meet the person who had transmitted this information after his death. He did not yet know that the man he had killed was one of the authors of the book. It eventually turned out that everything he had read was true, and he kept his promise. This impressed the former soldier so much that he decided to contact the medium again and continue his messages. He realized that what he was talking about could greatly help the living, and the story of his own killer was living proof of that. Thus, messages from the afterlife began to come through Wellesley Powell again. From these messages, it became clear that souls burdened by the weight of sin linger in the so-called land of mist. Here, in terrible torment and trials, they undergo the process of redemption by freeing themselves from all the evil that has filled their souls. Yet even in this state, they receive help from more developed souls. These souls, full of light and love, illuminate the path through the darkness and help them find a way out of this bleak place. For even in the deepest shadow, one must know where they are going to return to true life. The former soldier spoke about his role in this process. He also helped the souls burdened by sin achieve spiritual purity. This became his task, his mission. And when he grew tired of this, he rested in his home, which was in a beautiful place surrounded by a magnificent garden. In the afterlife, it is not difficult to create such a place, as everything there is created through the power of thought. The purer the thoughts, the brighter the soul, and the more beautiful things and places it can create. The realization that life continues after death could profoundly change a person's consciousness. First of all, it could significantly reduce the fear of death. If people believe that death is not the end, but a transition, they might develop a sense of inner peace and acceptance. This belief could help them see life as an ongoing process, where each step is part of a larger, perhaps even infinite cycle. Furthermore, this awareness could lead to a deeper appreciation of the present life. If death is not seen as a final ending, but rather as part of a continuing journey, it could inspire individuals to live more consciously, to be more mindful in their actions, and to take responsibility for their behavior. The idea that we are more than just our physical bodies and that our spiritual life continues could lead to a higher moral and ethical stance. It could also strengthen the sense of connection with others. If we accept the idea that life does not end but continues in another form, it could expand our understanding of relationships and compassion. We might begin to view the world less materially and more spiritually, leading to a greater sense of belonging and understanding of others. On a deeper level, this awareness could intensify the pursuit of inner peace and self-realization. If we believe that our true self exists beyond physical death, it could fundamentally change our perspective on daily life, our fears, and our desires. It might foster a desire to seek not only external success, but also spiritual fulfillment and growth. Overall, the awareness that life continues after death would likely have multiple effects on behavior and perception of the world. It could lead people to a deeper spiritual wisdom and a greater love for life and others.